So, Kev, did you want to start since you're the one that hasn't read this before? I didn't look. Did you build a thread
I
at
did
all?
not. You have notes. Um, I really enjoyed this. I think I'd love an updated version, but I think I did one tweet. I said basically anyone who hasn't read, if you're a Kings fan, you basically should read this because it's so enlightening about the team. There's so many little details that you wouldn't know unless you were following the team at the time, and I found it really engaging to read through, especially because a lot of this is before my time.
Yeah, for me too, like not having been like a lifelong Kings fan, this was like such a perfect kind of summary of like the early history of the team.
Hmm.
And I know it's like a lot of personal history to Jerry too, but like all the different drafts and all those early Sacramento teams I thought was so fun, and just that the reverence that he had for like a lot of those players like the Tisdale and Hollins and um, just all the guys he talks about are like they're oldies but goodies kind of, and I felt like I kind of knew them from his little descriptions of them, and I thought his intrigue, like how he talks about doing some of the trades and stuff like that, how they would like think that like, oh, this trade isn't going to happen, like what a failure, but then they realized like later on down the road they had like built a relationship with the other GM and set the groundwork for like something that happened later on, and I thought that was really interesting because I think we overlook that a lot of times, like when we're talking about why don't they just do this trade, it's like no, all these guys like have different relationships and different levels of communication, and like they've done different deals or like have had deals not work out that they want to make good on and that kind of thing. So I thought that was really interesting.
I think the most interesting part is I think a lot of people didn't know that like how involved Jerry was. I mean, if you grew up with the early 2000s Kings like I did, you'd never know that he was coach GM of the Kings. It's incredible how long he's been with this organization and all the insights he has as a result. I don't think there's a lot of teams that have had one person be so prominent throughout the history of the team. And obviously he's been the announcer for decades. So a lot of insight
Yeah.
into a team that other people wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, and he's just like, like all like I loved the way that the book was written so much because it was like so Jerry.
Yeah,
It's like what
absolutely.
we all know and love him for in terms of his broadcasting. It's like the hippity hop to the barbershop kind of colloquialisms, and but Dan Drysdale I think did such a good job of like capturing his voice, and he kind of explains, like all the beginning part where he talks about where he came from and how dirt poor they were, and the Larry Bird stuff is like so fun and interesting, and but you really understand like he just came from absolutely nothing and had this very like modest rise, and I think the opportunity levels were so different. Like he became an NBA coach from like a one room shack, you know and I don't know if that can happen anymore. Like he's just like some college coach and like randomly knows Phil, and gets like someone to put in a good word for him. But yeah, just just really good stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of like coincidences that made it happen, and he basically says like, yeah, the only reason he it is because it paid a little bit better. So a lot of decisions could have went a different way. So it's incredible that the way it happened the way it did.
Yeah, I don't know. So I don't know if it's absolutely necessary I even go through the thread since we've already like we've already read the book, we've already podcasted on it. The couple of things that I don't know that we hit on as much in our last discussion, which was a long time ago, and Kev, I don't think you were at it. But Bill Russell, we didn't talk very much about him because he was still alive at the time. I mean, he died so recently, and then Willis Reed as well. And so that part of this was, you know, meaningful, I think, even more so in the sense that both of those guys have passed on in this last year. Um, and I remember going back and like digging through the book to find, you know, the little parts that Jerry had written about them. And he's just so funny about it, like the part where he talks about riding in the car with them and, you know, not wanting to like be in a car crash because Bill Russell drove so fast because he thought that nobody would care that he died because he was with like Bill Russell and Willis Reed. That was hilarious. But just reading about those guys and remembering that those guys were also coaches here and a part of like the Sacramento, you know, tapestry is pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, Bill Russell, Willis Reed, and some unknown died in a car crash. That's what the
Yeah,
headline
yeah,
would read.
absolutely.
Some unknown.
I Bill Russell is fascinating because they're like the media perspective on Bill Russell is really like he's a little bit of a mystery to a lot of people, especially nowadays. So it's nice to get personal insight into things like that, especially outside of the court.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think he was also wasn't he also the Clippers coach in breaks of the game? Like it seemed like he floated around a little bit as a coach and never really got, you know, never really had great success at it, or at least not the success that he had as a player, I should say. But then that he was also the GM here. I think that he may have been this may have been the only place that he was the GM. Um, and I had listened to Jerry do a couple interviews post Bill Russell's death, and then I think post Willis Reed's death as well, where he just said both men were just so, you know, just incredible and nice and, you know, accepted him and delegated to him, which, you know, I just think is cool.
Looking through your thread here on Threads.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's easier to like see the thread because I get lost in where it was. I mean, the other thing that we didn't talk about, I know for sure, because I just like overlooked it, is you know, the twin tragedies, the Ricky Berry suicide, and then the Bobby Hurley accident. And I dug those out. They're at the bottom of the threads thread. They're kind of lost in the Twitter thread because there's so much stuff in there. But I definitely wanted to hit on those because I feel like those are things that are sort of like, you know, a part of like the lore of the tragedy of the Kings. And like only, you know, pretty hardcore fans like know about it. And people don't talk about those things a lot. I mean, I know James Ham has talked about Bobby Hurley's accident and the fact that there was like happened to be like a specialist in the hospital when he went into the hospital that basically saved his life by knowing what to do because what his windpipe I think was collapsed or something, and this specialist had just gone to a seminar on like how to address this specific issue. But I just dug out the full pages on when he talks about the Ricky Berry stuff. I cut a little bit out of the Bobby Hurley stuff because he does say a lot of really nice things about Bobby Hurley. Um, but I know that he does not like talking about, especially Ricky Berry. I know it's very hard for him to talk about it, and I haven't heard him talk publicly about it very often. So, like, I pulled those whole pages out, um, and it's just so, so tragic. I mean, I think he does a pretty good job here of like of looking at the personal, but also like the effect it had on the franchise. And just the promise, especially of Ricky Berry, like how special he might have been, um, just makes it that much sadder, kind of. Not that it's not sad anyway, not that suicide's not horrible anyway, but um, I just I thought he did a good job writing about it. I just wonder how much those two events, as personally tragic as they were for all the people involved, like set the team back as well. Like like I can't imagine that happening on a team that you're on.
I
Just as
mean,
a
if you get a superstar can really change the direction of the team. Obviously, if you want to win a championship, you need depth. But like Luka Doncic, for example, is basically carrying the Mavericks to the playoffs, right? So
yeah,
one player can really alter the direction of a team. Um, I think, but probably long term, it probably didn't change much with the team. I remember one of the quotes Jerry had in the book was talking about how if he knew the Sacramento was so accepting, then he would have tried to build more proper instead of trying to win immediately, like most places would have
mm,
needed. And I
yeah, that's
think
interesting.
decisions like that long term probably influenced the direction of the team more than any individual player.
Yeah, he mentions the fact that Ricky Berry committed suicide the same year that I think it's the same year that they picked Purvis Ellison. So it was kind of like a double whammy as far as like the hope of the team just kind of, literally died in the sense that Ricky Berry was gone, but and then Purvis was a bust. So yeah, just just I think this is such a good resource, like to go back. I feel like people ask questions about those, especially those two things a lot. I know that Kenny Caraway at one point on his show had been like, why did the Kings move here? And I went to this book and like found in here where Jerry talks about why they moved from Kansas City. Um, but it's like one of those books like that I feel like I go back to find stuff, from King's history because it's actually written down in this format that's like from like so much of the stuff that we've read, like the links are defunct, right? So you really like start
Yeah.
to like appreciate and love the archival value of a book, right? It's so much better than a meta link or a hyperlink or because those things just get outdated. And I mean, even if you have to read a paper book, it doesn't, what's relevant stays relevant in it, I guess.
Yeah, and one thing that Jerry's book does a really good job of is capturing the atmosphere of a relevant season, right? Like it's not super focused on wins and losses, but it's focused on the main plot lines of an individual season. Um, if we were going to talk about like let's say not like 2 years ago Kings, X's and O's basketball wise, actually not that remarkable, but Jerry would have like the way that Jerry explained it would be focused way more on, Luke Walton or something like that. There was a chapter, there was a season that I mentioned like record wise not much of a downturn, but everyone was dead. Like it felt dead. That kind of explanation is not something you can see when you look at the records of a team is like certain seasons feel so much worse because of coaching or whatever. And that's not something you can get from most resources. You just either you have to be there at the time or there's a resource like this. And that's why a book like this is so appreciated. I'm sure every fan base would wish that there was something like this for their team.
I wonder how many teams have something like this. I mean, the fact that they re-released it as Tales from the Sacramento Kings locker room makes me think there must be tales from other locker rooms too. You know what I mean? That are like
I'm
something.
sure the Celtics have a bajillion of these.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Even I at the thrift store I found Bob Cousy's biography the other day, and its tagline is Celtics basketball. Like it's about the Celtics, but through Bob Cousy kind of thing.
Mhm.
But that seems like maybe it's just a broader selling point
I
for
think
the market.
a Danny Ainge book would be incredible to read if he ever gets around to one of those.
Yeah, the Danny Ainge stuff in here was fantastic, and just I think the reverence that Jerry Reynolds had for how smart he is, kind of
Mhm.
like up to my estimation of him, and then also reading about him in Built to Lose. He plays like the main foil to Sam Hinkie, where he tracks all these different rebuilds, but he tracks the Hinkie rebuild as compared to the Ainge Boston rebuild, and it's just a little mind blowing. But yeah, and I think his story in here in one of these I have Omer had put Professor, let's see. There's a great story Jerry Reynolds tells about Danny Ainge. The Kings sucked that year, and Ainge came up to Jerry and said, "I think I know what our problem is. Our best player." And just, yep, that was the problem.
Yeah, yeah. At some point, coaching can't fix the problems with a team. At some point, it really just comes up to talent, and that
Yeah.
quote is such a great example of it.
What's so funny too is I think he like recognizes he's so good at like distilling complex information into really simple thoughts, you know. But I think some of the stuff he said is stuff that like I always knew, but I didn't know, you know, like this one I think, but in the NBA, so many teams, and it still applies, end up playing guys who don't deserve their time based on their abilities. They play them because of contracts or because the team drafted them or traded for them. The difference between good franchises and poor franchises is that the good franchises make those decisions quicker. If they've made a mistake, they move on, where it's drafts, trades, or whatever, and the bad ones refuse to move on. Like, I think that the first time we read this was at um, the climax of like the Marvin Bagley kind of like agent dysfunction and like,
Hmm.
everybody wanking about playing time and he wasn't going to get time as a starter and all this stuff. And it just like struck me as something that's so true that people don't always say out loud, you know. And it's somewhere else in here, and I don't see it like as a quote, but he says like, you can like talk about chemistry and coaching all you want, but the reality is like you have to have the talent to roll out on the floor. And again, like that's obvious, but I just don't know if people say it like in that plane of words all the time.
The quote you have, Meg,
One quote that stood out to me was when he was talking about, broadcasting. The thing I try to avoid on television is over talking. Grant and I try to focus on the games. You can't overanalyze or over discuss every play. A guy makes a 15-foot shot. How much more do you need to know? That's just like such a incredible insight into commentary. Obviously, like you can get some guys who are really good at explaining the details, and there are great moments of insight in the broadcast, but usually broadcast is best, to highlight different things, not necessarily to explain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I'm trying to like look over this stuff without being too picky about
so
doing. Which did you have a quote?
so Meg, with your quote that you put up, it still applies. Playing guys who don't deserve their time based on their abilities. They play them because of contracts or because the team drafted them or traded for them. So I thought to try to like potentially apply that to the Kings.
Hello, you have the hand raised? Are you gonna?
Uh,
Oh, can you not hear John?
No, I
See that
can't.
this is like the stupid spaces. I don't feel like they're working properly either. So for everybody in here, keep going, John, because I can hear you, and I'll put it in
Okay.
the
All right.
recording. But I don't know what's up with it. But everyone in here, if you're interested, I have this playback room set up, which I'm going to start using for these meetings, um, because I just don't trust spaces anymore.
All right.
They just break and do weird stuff. But sorry, John, go ahead and
Kevin will probably,
Kev, I'll let you know when
he
he's
may
done.
come back. I think he may after.
Yeah, I think he's
Yeah,
toggling
he's gonna
probably.
go back in. Okay. All right. Well, I wanted to apply this to the current Kings. Hold on a second. Current Kings team, and not that I think that either of these two players are going to be bad per se, are going to be bad players. But like, what happens if Sasha Vesenkov is good, like really good, and he's a natural four, and I guess it's kind of less than ideal that Keegan's probably not a natural three, but if Keegan plays three and Vesenkov plays four, Vesenkov could potentially start if he's really good, maybe after a couple 20 something games. But Barnes is kind of slotted in there at that four spot. And Barnes is going to make 18 million or 17, whatever it is, in the teens, in the high teens next year. Zinkov is going to make seven, whatever, something like that next year. Do you think? And Barnes is a seasoned vet and well respected around the league and whatever, blah blah blah. Would you think that they might just keep Barnes in a more minutes per game role? I don't really care about starting or coming off the bench, but more minutes per game role, even though he might be better as a super sub, six man. Would that be a something that might happen?
Yeah, God, it's so hard to say, right? I mean, and does it, I guess, like, as per what Jerry said, would it matter, like, whose agent is saying what, you know? I would think that for Harrison Barnes, this is probably, if he's being realistic, what I would think about his career is this is his last big contract, right? And he got 3 years at almost $18 million per year. So who the fuck cares? Like he's getting paid. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that they should sit him for Sasha unless Sasha's better, but I am saying that I think that Harrison probably, again, if he's being reasonable, like knows that that could happen, right? I mean, as you get older, don't you realize that younger guys can come in and outplay you? I mean, the other side of that too, for me, is like I look at the way that Mike Brown has used the roster, and I don't feel like there is as much of this kind of favoritism as far as like agents and contracts and stuff like that. Because if there was, he would have played Rashawn. He would have had to play Rashawn, right?
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Can you hear me now, Kevin?
yeah, I can.
Okay, cool.
Leaving seemingly fixed that. I think that Sasha is a more natural fit for the roster, and EuroLeague MVP, and he's one of the best off ball scorers. I'd be surprised if he isn't starting next season.
I'd
Yeah,
be
I think
I'd be
it. I
surprised either way. Either way, well, I mean, assuming Sasha's better, I'd be surprised either way. I don't know what to expect. One little
the other.
tidbit though I want to put in there is that you mentioned Bagley and his he was out of the rotation was what was going on at that time when his agent was getting pissed or he was getting pissed. His
Yeah.
agent conveyed that to the world. Um, his
Yes.
agent's Jeff Swartz, who's also Harrison Barnes' agent. So
Oh, that's
I don't know if that played
interesting.
a part in Barnes' contract or whatever, but maybe a little
Huh.
bit, but maybe not, probably not that much. And Malik Monk's
Yeah,
agent
I
as
hate
well.
having to
Interesting.
know
I
that.
guess he's a big agent. He's a big time agent. He's the agent for a lot of guys. But yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so I don't have it tracked in the threads, I don't think, but there is one story that Jerry tells in this book too about when they had a fairly good team and he was the coach of it, and he was like, I tricked everybody because my bench was way better than my starters. I could put my starters in, and if they could hold on, until the bench got in, I knew we were going to win because the bench was better. But I just had to play all these guys as starters because that was like the hierarchy, right? So I totally think that's doable. Like, I know that there's this like cachet and guys get paid based on like starter criteria and all that stuff. But I do think like a good coach can find it's not, I mean, you have to be able to like have a certain lack of ego to be on a winning team, right? And I think like Pete Carrill talks about it too, where it's like, what are you going to sacrifice to make the team, the priority over your own stats? And to me, it's like I don't think, like I said, I think where Harrison is in his career, I don't think he's like an egomaniac by any stretch. I feel like he would understand, especially the fact that he wanted to come back here too. I think if he wanted to leave, he would have left, but I think he likes winning and he likes being a part of it. And he understands that Mike is going to put him in a position to be a part of it. And if it's as a starter or a bench player, who really cares? But I also think we could, like, what's exciting to me is like how they started mixing the bench into the starters so much last year. So you really couldn't, like, it was always De'Aaron playing with more, some of the bench players, Domas playing with some of the bench players after like the first 6 minutes of the game. The starters were just mixed in with everybody else because of like the rhythm and the feeling that whatever Mike Brown had about it. So I think he could figure out something like in that last part of the season post All-Star break. If you go look at all the splits, the bench was actually better plus minus than the starters were, right? So I think there's the potentiality for that as well.
Well, that's also partially because they're playing against other benches, and to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Like in that
Yeah,
example
that's
you
a
brought
good
from the
point.
book, to bring it back to the book a little bit, is that was he saying that his starters, were not as good as his bench players, or was he saying that his bench players were better than the other team's bench players, and his starters were kind of good enough to hang in there with the other team's starters, and then our bench, the Kings bench, could come and beat the other team's bench, and between the first and second quarters, they could build a lead. I think I don't remember exactly what he was saying. I think it could have been either or, but
Yeah, I might have to dig in a little bit more to actually find
yeah.
the extended story. Let me see if I have it in the highlights so that I could like narrow it down. Oh, okay. So page 410. Let me see if I can pull the book up here. Page 410. Oh, it's not on page 410. Anyways, I won't be able to find it in a good
Neither
amount
would
of
I.
time
Yeah,
to read it.
yeah, neither would I.
Because my page numbers are all screwed up too for some reason. But yeah, that's a good point. I don't remember. I just remember it being like, well, why don't people do that all the time? Like everybody always talks about the starters, right? The starters. And I think you can assume that the starters are the ones who are also going to play the majority of minutes. So, I mean, that's the other factor. Is like you're saying, yeah, they're playing against um, lesser players theoretically because they're playing against the other people's bench. But it's also like, how do you distribute those minutes in a way that puts you at better advantage against, the oppositional players? I wish I have this in iBooks and not in Kindle. It's easier to find stuff in Kindle, but I'm not going to try and dig for it. I thought, and then the stuff about like the 2002 team. Um, that was more stuff that I like knew about already. That was not all totally new history to me, but it was still fun to like read through it and see what he had to say about like Jeff Petrie and um I had highlighted this: players can't do what the coach wants and others won't. When great coaching and great players work together, though, you get great teams that are wonderful to watch and they win championships. So there's some element of coaching and players, like I said, sort of sacrificing, um, that creates this greatness and allows for winning basketball, which is something I definitely saw last year. In the King, as far as the Kings go. Um, he also talks in here that made me think about the Kermit Washington stuff. Was he said I learned a valuable lesson from Travis. You can't assume that players can change positions. So I wonder, like, now it's supposedly like positionless basketball and all that, and everybody has different skills. And like, like just watched Victor Wembanyama like do a bunch of crazy shit on the court, with like
I think
really,
that's still true. Aaron Gordon is actually a really great example. They tried to make
uh,
him into like a three, right? They tried to make him an offensive guy, a do everything
yeah,
guy. But then, and that's why he wanted to leave the Magic, because he wanted a more defined role. He wanted to play his role.
that's
And
such
in
a
the
good,
second
yeah.
he got to Denver, he's an all-star basically. Not technically, but almost.
Yeah, and I think like that's a perfect call out. And I think like regardless of whether or not you're calling somebody the center or whatever, you have to have the distribution of the skills wherever
Yeah.
they're coming from. So
A
if you have
positionless
somebody,
basketball. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, if you have, I know that I was listening to some podcast and I can't remember which one it was, but they were saying like that they're classifying Victor as a four. They're listing him as a power forward, um, and because they don't want to put the responsibility of the center position on him yet. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, are they going to change that at some point? I mean, it probably doesn't matter really, but I think it gives them more flexibility to do that, because then you have your rim protection and your um, shot blocking, you know, all at the small forward, and you can still slot a center in who can either stretch or post play, right? Which is, Victor maybe isn't quite ready to be a fantastic post player. Theoretically, I don't know. He could probably do anything.
I think that your position is basically who you can defend, and on offense you play a role.
Yeah.
Um, you need to make sure you stay with your role, or you develop your role, or you build. I mean, you can theoretically change your role. You see some guards go from like more of a shooting guard to more of a point guard, James Harden, but obviously that's pretty hard. It takes a special player to really change the role. And I think Victor in particular, I think on offense he can do anything, but on defense that's probably the right decision. But I mean, he's probably fast enough. He when you watch him play, he looks more like a perimeter focused guy, and if he can keep up with other wings, then it would be okay. But I want to see him go against like Sasha, for example. If he's our four, and incredible off-ball guys against a big center, will he be able to keep up with them?
Yeah. I think the girthiness. I think girthiness. Like I watched the U19 FIBA or whatever that team was with Kenneth Lofton Jr. and Chet Holmgren versus Victor, and he really struggled with with Kenneth Lofton.
He's a fun player to watch by like Kenneth Lofton. Like definitely old school style play, but tremendously fun.
Oh, I lost my mic, I think. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
Oh,
hear
Yep.
you.
weird. Audio
Can you hear
problems.
us?
Like my earbuds just like took a dive somehow.
Yeah, we can hear you. You sound different, but we can
Oh,
still
okay.
hear you. Yeah,
Cool.
you do sound
Yeah.
different.
Um. So yeah. John, were you going to say something? Did you have something?
Well, just a little bit on Victor, as I think he'd be better as a trap the box weak side rim protector for now. Just like he could meet people at the rim, but like, or maybe he could be good, defending pick and roll, being in drop and in the other versions of defending pick and roll. He could do well there, but I mean he's got a lot of tools. He's just seems to be pretty thin so far, but that'll change in time. But
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I think like not having him. I don't know who else is on San Antonio right now, but I don't know what their roster's like, honestly. So, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I
Well,
think.
they traded away a center in Pirtle,
Oh, Pirtle.
so
Okay.
I assumed that Victor was gonna play center because they don't really have any starter caliber centers. But if he's playing the floor, they'll have to pick someone up.
That's interesting. I just watched the whole Spurs game. Like I kind of watched it in the background, but I have no idea who they were playing as center. Because it's hard to like watch. Uh, I mean, all you can see is Wemby pretty much. Um, but yeah, it was an interesting game. Portland won it though, because of like some dude that nobody ever heard of, which was kind of cool. Which is why I like summer league. Because there's always those dudes that nobody's ever heard of. It's my favorite.
Maybe we could talk about this quote from Jerry from Jerry. It's in the book, but man, I'm switching back and forth between my Kindle and the Twitter is screwed up here. But anyway, it says anybody who knows the NBA understands that unless you get a franchise guy, it's very difficult to change your team to the draft. So that was his opinion back then when he wrote the book, and I think nothing. I'm not sure much has changed except that it's made since then it's become harder to tank. They've made it harder to tank, and so I guess it's just
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so. I think it was on the Old Fashioned 3, which I haven't watched as religiously as I've listened to some other podcasts and stuff. But he said that there, and maybe it's in here. I can't remember, but I always remember he tells this story about how the only year that the Timberwolves were any good was the year that they used all their draft picks the year before, and so they had no draft picks to use. So they had to trade for Sam Cassell, and then they were actually good that year because they didn't. And I feel like that's really happened with the Kings too. As soon as the Kings like pivoted away from this concept of like building through the draft and finding our superstars, um, I think we got better. And I don't think you look around at like perennial kind of championship teams. Like, do they ever build through the draft? Like, not really, right? They can't.
I mean, Golden State, Milwaukee, kinda.
Okay, yes, but
perennial ones. Yeah, it's hard like Miami,
yeah.
but they don't care
So,
about the draft. Miami doesn't care.
well, and
Yeah,
like I totally get what you're saying there, Kevin, is they have that okay, so say the two timelines thing, right? From last year, the Golden State
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
That's not
But
working
now
so
they
well.
had to abandon it because their first timeline that they built, absolutely they built that to the draft, no doubt.
yeah, yeah.
But then their second timeline,
I feel like Golden State destroying their second timeline is almost certainly just through like angst. Like the reason they couldn't build was because like they couldn't make that happen was because of locker room and media. I feel
Yeah.
like it's not basketball. They
It's
couldn't have made it work.
yeah, it's vibes. They have a vibes issue.
Mm.
Denver has 3 guys that are major that they drafted, right? Or maybe more on in the bench, but
So what they
Yeah.
have Jokic,
Murray and
Porter
Porter Jr.
Jr.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Murray. And then actually Christian Brown was like super fun in the
Yeah.
playoffs, but I mean it was limited minutes. But I honestly think like everybody's freaking out about them losing Bruce Brown, but just use Christian Brown like that. You know what I mean? Like he can do the same thing pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I the things that Jerry, like the amount of roles that he had, like you said earlier, Kevin, is just so remarkable, and like the nuggets of wisdom that he drops about each role.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I think it's just kind of, they're so relevant still. Um, and I think they carry over, even though there's like 50 million more people in every front office or on every coaching staff. Like in most of these things that he's talking about, there's like 3 coaches, or like, or he's like the GM of the Monarchs, and then he's also like crunching, videotape to scout, players for the Kings and stuff. Like he just seemed like he did like everything over the
I
top.
thought it was funny how
Yeah.
he just he seemed pretty lucky for him, how they didn't. I can't even remember what he said, but like they paid him too much, so they didn't want to let him go, stuff like that, and like Bill Russell like hooked him up and kept him on for an extra year, and like until eventually he was an institution in the Sacramento Kings, and like they weren't gonna fire him, but like when the first 2 years there, he kind of just stuck around. That kind of like he
Yeah,
just got good luck. It just was kept his job or got a different job and kept that job. It's pretty funny.
coaches
It's cool.
went through like Phil Johnson, like Dick Motta, Gary St. John. Like I can't even name them all, but he names them all in here, and it's like, how did he survive all of those turnovers? It's just kind of crazy.
Right.
Yeah,
And
multiple owners. It's like you'd assume all the different owners would clear house, but he survived multiple ownership changes too.
Yeah.
yeah,
But obviously he did mention like he's lucky to keep his job, but he was never set for success in regards to coaching at
Yeah.
least.
Sure.
All of the seasons he was the coach was basically interim until
And
they can find someone else.
have either of you gone to the Van Gogh exhibit down in West Sac? Because I got
no, is it the
No.
this time around reading this book, I got a reference. There's a cool a really cool Van Gogh exhibit in West Sac right now, and I got a reference that I totally was over my head last time. It said he was talking about Greg Lukenbill. Let me read a little bit about it.
Yeah.
He's saying, okay, Luke was ahead of his time, which unfortunately happens to most visionaries, whether it's politics or business or sports. The people who are out of the box, who see things differently, don't always benefit from it. That's Greg Lukenbill. If he were an artist, he'd have cut off his ear by now, which is a reference to Vincent Van Gogh, who cut off his ear in some manic rage, and like his own ear in some manic rage. And so I didn't know that was Vincent Van Gogh he was talking about. I just thought I'd mention that because there's a nice exhibit for sure in West Sac right now for Vincent Van Gogh. But
That's interesting.
yeah.
Uh, is there any other like stories from this or that jump out? That early stuff was so cool. Like I loved like the old Arco stuff, the first Arco, and then the second Arco, and just how much people appreciated having the Kings here. The early Larry Bird stuff, I thought was fascinating.
You're muffled a little bit. I can understand you, but you're a little
Oh,
bit away from the mic or something.
I think I put it on my chest.
Okay.
Can you hear
Yeah,
me
you're
now?
good now.
Yep.
I think my AirBuds just stopped working. I'm gonna see if I can find other ones.
I think that The early stuff is definitely the most interesting and enjoyable because of, he was on the front lines. But I think the season that the Kings built up, the season that we got Jeff Petrie, and the trades moves they made, the way he described those was particularly interesting too. I really enjoyed the discussion about the Mike Bibby trade. Let me pull that up. Um, he was saying how it was basically no risk because the versatility of Doug Christie and Bobby Jackson, even if Mike Bibby didn't work out, they still had guys because both of them could do either role.
Well, that's a great one. Um, I feel that way with Sasha. Like, I feel like I know, John, you're kind of like, why didn't they get better? Like, but for me, I'm like, if Sasha can be better, like we're better, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe I have too much, I like overrate. Um,
I still think we have a big issue with a backup center. That's my big concern. I hope we address it.
yeah.
Yeah,
No,
Lim was playing that last at the end of last season, and they kept him as that. But where's I honestly don't know where the status is with Keita. Is he signed a two-way or signed a regular contract or what?
I think
he
he's a two-way
hasn't
right
signed
now.
a
He
contract.
hasn't.
He has a qualifying offer,
Oh, for a regular contract?
but I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I don't know. He had a qualifying offer at the same time that they gave one to Colby Jones and Keon Ellis.
Hmm.
So I'm assuming it was a two-way, and I think he probably said, or his agent or whatever said, we want to play summer league first and see if we get any,
Right.
real roster offers. So I don't know. People are pretty hard on him. I don't like. For me, I look at him and I'm like, this guy's playing like 20, 25 minutes a night in G League, 20, 25 minutes a night in Summer League. That's a totally different thing than playing 8 minutes as a backup. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know. I like him.
He just doesn't look ready. I mean,
Yeah, I
he
think
looks
that's what
great
most people are
in some.
saying.
Yeah, he just doesn't look ready. He looked okay in G League, but what I saw from him in summer, I haven't been religiously watching, but he didn't look super ready, and I don't think he will. On paper, he's the perfect fit, but that's on paper,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
yeah.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, we'll see what ends up happening. I'm trying not to be too attached to like end of the roster guys because I think that kind of is heartbreak in some cases. But
Yeah, I get that.
to me, I mean, his defensive, the opposition's field goal percentage against him, like when he's in the game, should be what determines whether you give him a chance to be a backup or not. You know what I mean? And see if he can. And like what he's good at is like turning it on late in the game, like having clutch time, really good clutch time defense and stuff. I think what he really needs to work on is having better hands so that he could dunk better and grab more rebounds. But, um, I'm not like, I don't think Mo Bamba is like significantly better than him or anything like that. Like, I still think he could be something, but I think I'm in the minority at this point.
Okay. Well, that does leave a Alex Len is your guy apparently right now, or maybe Trey Lyles. I added something when you brought up Meg about De'Aaron and Domas playing with the bench guys. Yeah, that's because they never let one of them be off the floor if they could avoid it. It was always De'Aaron starts it off, and then
Yeah.
De'Aaron goes out at 6 minute mark. Domas stays in until De'Aaron comes back in, and Domas sits down, and blah blah blah. That's how they did it. So really, in that case, the most you can have. Well, maybe I'm doing the math wrong, but I think the most you can have is a 9 man rotation, really, because those two guys will be on the floor at one of the other times. So they're not. You can't have a 10 man. And so,
Yeah, unless you have and they never played Domas with other centers, right? So they almost never
oh
played
right,
Domas with Chemezi. They almost never played him with Alex Len. And
Krishan.
I don't know if it would be a different story with Nimi, but I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think you're just trying to fill those minutes. I also think it's possible that they try Sasha as a small ball five.
We got Trey Lyles.
Uh,
He could be your small ball 5.
yeah, yeah, everybody's pretty high on that one. I am not, but
Yeah.
I think situationally that could really work
Yeah,
too.
that's a lineup thing.
Yeah. There you
Yeah,
go.
Matchup.
yeah.
Agree. I agree.
And Trey, the one great thing about Trey too is you can play him with Domas. But you're not
Yeah.
worried about floor spacing at that
Yeah.
point, right?
Yeah.
And theoretically, it would be the same thing with Sasha, but we'll see. We'll see where that is. But Sasha does have post moves and stuff like that. And he's really good at like backdoor cuts, and he's just such a fantastic cutter that I think it opens the game up in an interesting way for sure.
I just like having a screen setter though. If it's Trey or Sasha as your center, like who's setting screens for De'Aaron at that point? you know,
Yeah, and I
Keegan
don't
or
like
who?
that's neither of those guys do I really trust as like a hub, even a high hub,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Which is okay. So like in summer league, they have been using Neemias as a high hub. So they've been using him just like they used Domas. So he sets a shit ton of screens. And that's the other like number I would be interested in looking at for him is how many screen assists is he getting? And they have the guards and stuff using him as like to snake screen off of and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, and they're having him do dribble handoffs, and he is actually like a really good passer. So I see something there with Neemias, but I don't know that you always want to duplicate Domas's skill set anyways. You know what I mean? Because like what they did last year is when Domas was not the primary playmaker, they just made De'Aaron the primary playmaker.
Yeah.
And that's confusing. And
Oh.
so
Okay.
anyways.
Yeah. Hey, if either of you are interested, I would recommend definitely at least only for like for a day for a month for 1 month, paying for Gibson Piper's The Basketball Playbook. If you're interested, he's got a Dropbox filled with little clips of various plays, and he's got a playbook of the plays, like a PDF of like
Oh, that's cool.
little diagrams of all of them, and you can match them up with the videos.
What is it, like a Patreon or something?
No, it's his
Or
own website. I mean, I think it's $20 a month. You,
oh, Gibson
well,
Piper?
I would just search the basketball playbook. He should come up pretty well. Actually, that could be a big one. It could come up all over the place. It's thebasketballplaybook.com. Yeah, thebasketballplaybook.com.
Okay,
And
cool. I'll go check it out.
yeah, he does Sacramento Kings from last year. Their playbook from last year, according to him. He was just watching the games, not on the coaching staff, but he just does this all the time apparently because he's got playbooks for all different types of teams, all different teams in the NBA. So and college.
Yeah, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But
So is there anything else we should talk about in terms of this book? There's, let me see here.
another thing I could talk about is that Jerry just seems like a guy that he gets to say what he wants to say. He was pretty honest. He was pretty
Yeah,
honest in this book, and like he talked about Mitch, and like Mitch pissed him off, like such like that. Mitch did us wrong here and there, and like something like that, and like not many other people could say that. I mean, it's been a long time since Mitch was on the team, but back when this book was written, it was probably it's not a he could just talk about whatever he could say whatever he wants to say, and people are going to say like, okay, yeah, that's Jerry Reynolds. We'll let him say it. That's just something that struck me
yeah,
about the
for
book.
sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, when this came out, he was still a part of the organization. So I wonder if he did hold his tongue a little bit, but he's even like that in the broadcasting booth sometimes, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Where he just is not a bullshitter. Um,
I had a quote that stuck out to me. Young people have asked me, how did I get a job in the NBA? And I'm quite honest with him. I don't know. That was never my goal.
yeah,
If I had stayed in Rockhurst College, I'd been happy, right? So I think that is a great summary of Jerry in a nutshell, right? he was able to get up and do all these positions because he didn't have that ambition. He
Yeah.
he wasn't the guy who was like looking to usurp the guy he built relationships. Sometimes it's better to be a good person than it is to be, the absolute best. And I think that, yeah, you just have to have passion, and then sometimes your passions will lead you to great places. And that's a really inspirational quote for me, because like, yeah, sometimes you end up in places that even if you didn't mean to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. Like take when opportunity knocks, like answer the door. Like,
Hmm.
you know, um, for sure. But I also think Jerry, I mean, he's again like one of those people that I sort of view him like I keep using egoless as like uh something to aspire to because I feel like a lot of people like they're really about like clout chasing or like they're about themselves and like
Yeah.
Jerry is about basketball you know
Hmm.
um and he's just kind of humble and has this his sense of humor. I think for a lot of people, like my whole family has a really fantastic sense of humor, but it's sort of, I think people who are naturally really funny, it sort of covers, a sense of, maybe not being quite good enough otherwise and having to entertain people, that kind of thing. Not to get too deep or anything, but Jerry's just, his sense of humor is just so good and so funny, but it also seems sort of self-deprecating in a way. I just found this too. He tells a story about like how everybody thinks like, oh, just like say it all in the huddle, and like, the guys will like absorb it all. And he's like, half the time the guys in the huddle aren't even listening to you, So like you, and I love this little bit, especially since it's kind of a callback to the spaced out thing too, where he says, so I would repeat stuff in the huddle. I just say things over and over again. So to try and make sure that they heard it. But then he says, what I'm telling them is 80% crap and 20% pearls of wisdom. So I thought that was a funny callback to that 80-20 rule from Spaced Out, where everything's like 80-20 kind of. Um, but I also thought it was funny that he talks about how the guys aren't fully like tuned in when they're in the huddle and stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time you don't even know if they heard the play. You're just hoping against all hope that they did. It's just funny. Let's see. Open the court up and gave our guys more room to operate. He talks about like, he talks about the 2002 team basketball concepts are exactly the same as like sprawl ball, right? Because he talks about how like we didn't like our plan wasn't to shoot a bunch of 3-point shots, but those are the guys we had, so we shot a bunch of 3-point shots, right? And then
Hmm.
what happened? Like we had more space to move on the floor. It turned out we moved the ball more. Like it turned out to be this really beautiful brand of basketball that everybody was excited about. Um, what else? Anything else?
No, I think I'm okay.
I think
But go ahead, Kevin.
I have like one or two more quotes I'd like to mention.
Yeah, go for it.
One about Jay Will. Jason, more than anyone else, saved this franchise because he gave us a personality. He was the perfect guy for us at that point in time. I think a lot of people underestimate how important a good atmosphere or good vibes can have on a team. Sometimes really that's what the difference between a good team and a bad team is. I think watching Golden State the next few years will be a great example of how vibes are shaping play.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
yeah.
And yet he wasn't here for the real like success of the team.
Mhm.
But you're right, like he established that.
Yeah, the
really fun.
atmosphere, yeah, the fun.
Yeah, yeah,
The Mike Bibby trade is just fascinating in general because I don't think many other teams would have traded the at the time the personality, the face of the franchise. But we did, and it made for a much better team.
yeah. Well, I liked what mentioned earlier about the groundwork for that trade and the fact that they already had sort of like backup skill sets in case it
Hmm.
didn't work out. I mean, I think that's again, that's like a team building kind of concept where you're building like those five pillars, but you have insurance, right?
Hmm.
Um, so,
And then I have
Sean,
one
did
more
you have
quote.
a couple too? Or you have one more, Kev?
Yeah, I
Or
can't seem to find it anymore, but uh, hold on, give me a second.
I wish I knew more about the Monarchs. I really didn't. I watched like the one championship game they played, but I really didn't. I wasn't engaged in the Kings at that time. Um, to be really excited about the Monarchs. But the stuff that he talks about in here about the Monarchs is really interesting too.
Yeah, and it's like another thing that Jerry has done, revolutionized and like become effectively Hall of Fame GM for the WNBA. That's never would have guessed.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did find the other quote I was looking for. J1 had a very unclear picture of his own talent. He wasn't stiff. He wasn't was disagreeable. Probably his only real flaws was that he could shoot the ball at all, and he just thought he was better than he was. I think I think that's quite important in regards to certain players when you watch and look at them. Sometimes it really just is that if you try to do everything, if you try to be better than you are, it'll lead to failure. I just always think of
It's
Wally
such a
Cauley
fine
Stein.
line, right?
Yeah,
Like I feel like without confidence, like I was like the narrative around Victor and Brendan Miller, like those two like divergent narratives are so different. Like, and I'm like, how is this Brendan guy supposed to ever be better if like nobody believes he can be better? Like, you know, I know that there's like other stuff involved too, but
people were
like I
getting really aggressive on that one, on the
it's
Brandon
just
Miller being a mistake pick over Scoot. And how
yeah.
Charlotte, it's just lol Hornets, just like we had to deal with lol Kings.
Oh,
And
exactly.
I
That's see,
feel
that's part of why I
terrible.
feel so bad about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't, you know, I don't know anything about Brandon Miller. I watched him like but he's like 18 or something. Like give him a minute, dude.
Right? We haven't gotten
It's
through the
just
season. We haven't even started. They haven't played any NBA minutes, and people are already labeling him a bust.
yeah, oh people were like all in after that first California like it's one game. But then Vic put
Also,
up
that
almost
Charlotte
the
team
same
is really
stat
bad.
line in his first game. And like everybody's like, oh, he'll figure it out. No worries. Like he's gonna be the greatest ever. Like no
Yeah.
problem. Like,
Yeah.
okay,
The
alrighty then.
Charlotte team, yeah, that's really bad. Like it's one of the worst professional basketball teams I've seen. The Summer League Charlotte Hornets. Uh,
Oh yeah,
so it's like yeah, he's not playing well, but how much of that is on him when
yeah,
the team is as bad as it is?
yeah.
Well, I would like to
The
read How to Watch Basketball Like a Genius. If you look at the reviews, just check out the reviews from the people, not from the review people, but from it's
yeah.
just they seem to love it.
Let's do that one then.
What do you think about that, Kevin? You think how to watch? Check out How to Watch Basketball Like a Genius on
Yeah, it
Amazon.
sounds interesting. I'd be down.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
How many
Yeah.
pages? I didn't
Let me.
see.
I'll do.